Hello, listeners, and welcome to a special edition of the AdQuick MAdvertising Podcast, the podcast that explores the intersection of culture, content, advertising, tech, all of the things that you care about. Today, we have a special guest. We've got Sherveen. He's a longtime friend of mine. He is the founder and CEO of venture-backed Free Agency. Since 2019, they've helped hundreds of candidates in tech achieve over 400 million in job offers from startups and large companies alike. He's also an angel investor. He's the host of two other shows that I've been enjoying on YouTube. He's a great guy overall, and one of the people in tech everyone knows and talks to about all sorts of subjects. Sherveen, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Adam. Always a pleasure. And as you mentioned, we've been friends for a very long time. And the thing that I appreciate most about you is you let me be a nuisance whenever I decide to tweet at you. Which is something that I think is underrated as a skill set. It's funny because you have this interesting relationship where you've been a client of Free Agency. We've talked about careers, but then I think we've talked about culture more broadly. We've had interesting conversations that extend beyond it. And one of the things that I appreciate is always like your experience in kind of being a, what do we call it now, an X-influencer rather than a Twitter influencer, has always been at like the bridge of kind of what's going on in tech, obviously, and marketing, obviously, as an expert in those fields, but also this like sub culture that has always been, something that I think I've been fascinated by. You've been commenting on. You have the Substack now, which I always enjoy. I think I'm probably one of your first 5 paid subscribers and continue to be a diligent paid subscriber.
You are one of my first paid subscribers. And also for listeners, Sherveen successfully helped place me at a previous job where basically he helped train me to be a great interviewer, because sometimes some people are good at their job and they're not great at selling themselves, right? There's like a whole different skill to be good at marketing a company versus marketing yourself. I'm actually a bit of an introvert. It's a lot of work to get me to do a podcast like this and to do public speaking, which I do both because I'm interested in improving myself and doing better. But what Sherveen helped me with specifically is, how do you frame your career story so that it tells the right story, it ticks the right boxes for a team. How do you present yourself really well in interviews, which it's a hard thing, right? I mean, Sherveen, you've worked placing people at some of the biggest companies in the world. And I feel like you've probably talked to really talented engineers who just aren't so great at talking to a company.
Yeah, I think the hard part is even, to your point, talented engineers who aren't good at kind of storytelling maybe as a native skill, or there might be, but even salespeople or marketers who do storytelling as part of their core functional area, it's still really hard to switch to the mode of selling yourself. I think a lot of the factor is you're so deep in it. It's kind of like a founder who's too deep in their product weeds, not yet having their pitch down, where the details that you think are important aren't necessarily the analogies that an employer needs to hear. The motions or exercises that you've gone through aren't necessarily the right ones that someone who doesn't yet know you wants to hear. They don't trust you in the same way a colleague might or your boss might. And so you have to go, okay, what's the outsider's perspective on this? And how do I, sequence a narrative? And, we don't do, or hopefully we don't do job search that often on our careers. There's only so many times that you actually have to go through that motion. And so a lot of this is this lack of practice, this lack of kind of grounding. And again, tech as a whole, whether it was back in the day and you want to optimize for salary, or now where the job market's kind of fallen off of a cliff, and that's putting it lightly. In both cases, it's important. So that core storytelling is a lot of what we do.
So we'll circle back to talking about jobs and careers, but the genesis of today's conversation, I've wanted to have Sherveen on the podcast for a while, but we got into a discussion today because something that's going on right now in the world, and this is something that I think has been like even since around the pandemic, I think people have been under quite a bit of duress and stress as they go about their job and as they go about their life, from various changes in the world and geopolitics and, maybe investments and stocks and financials. And I think it's been a difficult time. But with that said, I was writing today on the fact that I feel like we've hopefully passed peak doomerism, or maybe along the lines of, yes, things could be better, but, can we be more, I guess, optimistic in our own lives a little bit and have that just help be a shield, I guess, when we're going through our work. And I guess Sherveen basically cautioned me on, you don't want to come off as too much of an optimist, because there is a lot going on and there's a lot of emotions right now. And I think there's some balance. And I thought today we could have Sherveen on to discuss a little bit of how as a startup founder, or, especially at startups, I think it's, you're not giving the same leeway as you are at large companies, but you're building the machine, you're doing all these things, and there might be chaos in the world. And so how do you balance, the external environment and things happening with, the dream of growing your company and trying to stay focused? So I guess that's probably the broadest possible way we could start the discussion.
Well, I think the hard part about it, and here's where I think the post-2020 trend really begins, is what happens when an industry really turns into a political machine. Because the reality that I think we don't talk enough about, and even politicians talk about it, tech talks about it, it's not that we talk about it zero, but we're not that honest about it, which is the industry really got politicized post-COVID. Probably around 2022 especially, this is when some skeptics around, that post-COVID period really began to gain a voice, where technologists maybe began to see Trump's second term as something that they wanted to get involved in, especially in the venture capital class. And I think the challenge that happened in that moment is you have this bifurcation of people who have a voice and don't. Or at least that's, a large part of what I hear from founders, from employees, from executives, where there's a class of people in venture capital who kind of became micro-influencers, celebrities. This happened over the past decade, not just post-COVID. They are the popular people on Twitter. People want funding, so their Substacks of a VC, can do really well. People just want access, right? They want access to capital. They want access to deals. And then you have, maybe what we can still call the majority of technologists who have a different opinion or perspective, or even just a different kind of lived experience, whether it's their literal life, their working life, than some of these venture capitalists or capital allocators. And when the politics bifurcated, what I think has really happened is it's hard for any of these individuals to feel like they have a voice. So, just as a tangible example, the loudest voices right now on X in the realm of politics, but also tech, are folks who are part of or very, very closely related to the current administration, which, people who have seen me on Twitter know my opinion about this. I'm very anti the current administration. Regardless of whether they're anti or pro, the challenge is they're not very open to discussion. They're not very open to the idea that there exists maybe this degrading quality of life under what is now their rule or their philosophy. This is the founders funds, the Andreessen and Horowitzes of the world, the Kraft Ventures of the world, who again have come to be our new leaders in so many ways, but are not quite accepting of the fact that as they became our new leaders, not all founders and not all employees are going to be on board with what they perceive as, again, if we put it in its most extreme, kind of a revision of what our democracy looks like. And I think the hard part is, how do you then as a founder, how do you then as an executive, how do you then as an employee operate when you feel like there's a trash compactor of pressure, where the people who own the capital, who own, again, now governance, go one way where your opinion might completely be in another vector. And I'll give an example as to how this gets really practical. A lot of founders are immigrants. I mean, a lot of the movements that we've seen over the past month coming from the administration are, by and large, very, very anti-immigrant policies, regardless of anyone's, kind of political leaning. I refuse and don't have, kind of room for the seizure, basically, of people who are on permanent resident visas, green cards, or who are citizens now just being detained temporarily by different government forces over the past few weeks. That's just unacceptable. And as an immigrant, even if you think some of these cases are flimsy, some of them aren't, whatever it might be, as an immigrant founder, you go, am I supported? Do I have a place here? Do I have risk? If I'm on a visa, what do I think about what might happen to my future? In fact, venture capital is a supporting cohort of these immigrant founders over the past decade, where you go, oh, these are some of the people who might write to my congressman on my behalf. And now you go, wait, will they even do that if they're no longer really considering that I bring value in the same way that I used to a decade ago when my family immigrated for the first time? And for me, my family came in 92, and a lot of the thing that I grew up in, we're an Iranian immigrant family, is this respect of, kind of governance and American treatment of the melting pot.
Yeah, and it seems like immigration is something tech has always been pro, and this almost seems like it's a divide between, I think, what like the tech right would say they're pro-immigration and sort of the, hard red,
I don't disagree with
deep
you.
American
I disagree
right.
with you. I got to disagree with you. I don't think the tech right is pro-immigration. I think they tweet when they think it's necessary to give themselves cover so that they continue to get access to founders and deals, because they don't want to miss an immigrant founder. They don't want to miss access to a deal where they're going to be seen as political enemies. So every once in a while they'll tweet. But they by and large funded the current administration. They by and large are demolishing norms, whether it's through Doge or, again, kind of being enablers of the current AG and kind of immigration policy. We aren't living in a world where, kind of complicity should be taken lightly. So I don't actually think they're pro-immigration whatsoever. They might tweet about it and they might show, a video where they say, oh, and again, a lot of them are immigrants, but you have to think, what are the other incentives? What are the other things that they gain? And a lot of this, I think, is a revision, again, of what got us to where we are today. And this is what you and I were talking about a little bit on Twitter. A lot of our progress was built on a mixture of optimism tempered by skepticism. It was this notion of capitalism, not unbridled, but emboldened, let's say, by immigration, by a strong judiciary, by a strong, kind of sense of the law. All of these things are what brought us here, and yet they are picking at different parts of it. So even though they're not necessarily explicitly the ones tweeting the same way that the alt-right or MAGA right are, the tech right is just as anti-immigrant.
It's interesting because it's in pretty much the entire tech industry's interest for more smart, motivated people to come here and build startups and be part of the ecosystem. And my experience, and this is so interesting because my experience in tech from the start of my career, almost no one in the tech sector even really talked about politics. And it's interesting to watch that develop over the years, because my experience when I first joined was, it seemed like when I first moved to San Francisco in particular, what was everyone interested in? Nerdy things, going to startup meetups, talking about, what we could build, playing with robotics. And it's interesting how politics has crept into that conversation. And I don't know how we return to it, but I would love to get to a world where almost none of us are talking about politics because everything is run well and we can just, focus on tech. So
I think we're too late though, right? Because tech decided to take over, and now, I know this sounds, partisan, but it really isn't. If you look at the details, sometimes when people are accused of being partisan, all they're doing is describing reality out loud. That's a phrase that I've heard someone use, and I think it's accurate. Which is, we're seeing, institutions be torn down. We're seeing the checks and balances in U.S. government kind of be unfurled, and a lot of this is from Elon, David Sachs, A16Z, Founders Fund, Kraft, these venture funds who are getting involved and are part of this administration. They cannot, distance themselves because not only did they fund it, but they're the active participants within it. And so now tech has become politicized because the reason that these folks are doing it is obviously in their own capitalistic interest, and their money is everywhere, right? Like if you're a significant startup, either they're on your cap table or they're probably an LP in a venture firm that's on your cap table. And so I don't think we can go back. I think like the genie is out of the bottle. And I think this is something that they'll come to regret over time, because there was a bargain, right? The bargain was you will get fabulously rich and wealthy, as part of this capital allocator class, but you're also going to be kind of a participant in the social contract, and they're tearing up the social contract. And I think the thing that they maybe are discounting is how mad people will get and go, okay, hold on. Even in the Biden admin that they so talk negatively about, you got wealthier. In the Obama admin that they now negatively look upon in retrospect and have revised what they thought and felt about the Obama, they got wealthier. And so again, there's this notion that I think they've kind of, again, genie's out of the bottle. I don't know how we in tech go backwards, because to our conversation today, your Substack was not intending to agitate me, as an example, but the reason it did is because I think now when people talk on politics or talk on tech, you have to be talking about both and kind of encapsulating the entire world experience going on, because we've essentially intertwined those things. So when you mention Doomerism, we're not in 2017, where like if you had tweeted about Doomerism, what you're really talking about is people who are, we can call them nihilistic, we can call them whatever we want, but they're very negative as to like the livelihoods and the quality of life that is possible net of everything. But now we're talking about people who feel like everything that they believed in is being turned against them, that the all the screws are being turned, and by the way, sometimes not against them, but instead against the populace, because some of these people who are very upset aren't the ones being affected, but are instead liberals who maybe have more of a, there's that chart that always goes around on Twitter, which is like conservatives are close to family in terms of what they care about versus liberals are closer to like the rest of the world. And so that chart, represents, I think, a lot of people's feeling, whether they're either living the experience of, okay, the benefits that I want, if I'm a medical researcher, where are my grants coming from? If I'm an immigrant, what do I view as the potential risks when I'm walking down the street? When all of that turns a certain way, then your Substack, that again in 2017 might have been innocent, I went and go, hold on, we can't discount what these people are feeling. And to me, again, they're roles for different people. But change comes not just from the believers and the optimists, but also the challengers, right? Change comes from the notion of like, I'm agitated, I'm bothered, there's something discomforting about what's going on. And so some people then will have resources to act on that change. And you might call those people either not doomers or doomers with a cause. And then some people won't have resources. And so the best they can do is contribute to the perspective by having a voice and saying, hey, here's how I feel everything's going wrong.
Yeah. And so I guess I have another question for you. This would actually be in terms of, I think there's also some fear in the tech industry, and I think this is probably another reason a lot of people in tech did vote right, is because to whatever extent this might have happened in America, but I think a lot of people looked at what was happening in the EU with AI regulation and saw that and then didn't think of anything else in the election. They're just like, this is existential for tech. Whatever fear, rational or not, I actually don't know the answer to this, but whatever fear they had of, a Democrat deciding to copy paste what was going on and regulate AI away, I think, is something that, maybe for some of these guys, it's even ahead of money because, they like the technology sector, right? So do you have any commentary on that?
Yeah, I think, look, I'll re-summarize as your point being there's like an overriding regulatory regime that they feared. But I think wanting to be part of policy requires honesty. And so I'll go and I'll directly call out who I believe has been extraordinarily dishonest ever since, about 2 years ago when he decided to start tweeting again, which is Mark Andreessen. He keeps citing, for example, this meeting where he was told startups won't exist anymore. The Biden admin told us you won't build AI. We're going to have 2 AI companies exist, and that's all that's going to happen. And he keeps citing this on Rogan and all these podcasts he goes to. And the reporting from everyone else who's been in that room, whether policymakers or other AI executives, then that's not really what was said. I'm not saying that's not what Mark heard, because Mark is hyperbolic and a capitalist who might have heard people talking about regulation where he perceives that would be the result. But he's not honest enough to have brought that up either at the time or later in the transparent way of saying, here's the regulations they proposed, here's what I think would happen. Let me have the battle of ideas now come. Let me debate, in AI, the Sam Altmans of the world, in policy, the Ezra Kleins of the world, and have a discussion about how this can all happen. It must be that it's A16Z's version of American dynamism. Regulation is default bad. We need to be running at full pace. Because he continues to kind of just mock people who think that there should be a more cautious approach. I use AI 70% plus of my day. I love large language models. I love generative AI. However, I can still imagine a world. I'm not sure. I don't subscribe to either AI doomerism or AI unbridled good, because I'm not sure whether or not bad actors getting a hold of certain systems can be prevented in the first place. So that's like one reason to not regulate. But B, maybe it can be regulated, or we can spend money a certain way, and we should, because it could be existential. When we see a drone of a certain type and we imagine vision models plus large language models plus other versions of generative AI, we can very easily imagine something being turned against us. Does that mean I didn't support a pause in AI when that was like kind of one of the conversations with Anthropic CEO, et cetera. But he's not being honest. And so if they all were being honest and they wanted to have the conversation, that would be something that I would really appreciate. Let me put that in kind of one bucket. So that's my first comment, is the individuals who have that point of view have never been honest and willing to have a really good conversation. By the way, I'm not saying there was always easy places to have that conversation too. And that's a critique of our society. Whether it's about AI or other topics, there aren't great places for us to have long form, interesting conversations about things like policy, except podcasts of comedians. which is really unfortunate because those tend to be, kind of also rightish spaces. So that's the only people talking about this stuff.
I also listen to non-comedian podcasts like Noah Smith, who No Opinion. There's reasonable people doing it too, but I guess
have
to your
a large,
point, not as many people listen.
Nerdy audience. Yeah,
not
he has a nerd audience. He captured you and me. He hasn't captured, if I go down the street in New York, we don't know how many people know his name. So that's bucket one. Is like, I think there's a dishonesty to those folks. The second bucket is, even if you have a lot of those feelings and you think that threat of kind of regulation is a big deal, or this is becomes kind of a single topic voter or whatever, you shouldn't buy in then to Trump no matter what. And this is where I do get partisan, right? Because this individual is a mixture of bad as a person and clearly ill as a policymaker. Whether you look at the first term, whether you look at his past as a family man, as a business person, then as a politician, then what he's doing now in the second term, whether directly or in kind of cahoots now with Elon, I think we're close to the ballgame. I mean, the ways in which they're acting on judicial rulings and saying, hey, judges should be impeached, the way in which they're detaining people with permanent resident cards or who have citizenship and not checking and detaining them for 12 hours at a time, the way in which they are destroying agencies that employ a lot of people for very good reason and lying about it on X every single day. You'd only do this if you believe that you'll never be held accountable. That's the suggestion I've been making to people a lot lately. Again, I'll restate that. You're going to only act as brazen as Trump and Elon and the surrounding crowd if you never believe you'll be held accountable, because the things they're doing, most people do not like, and that shows in the polls. So I wonder what's going to happen with elections moving forward. I wonder what's going to happen. Here's my doomerism for you. What happens if there isn't an election moving forward? Do you this is a real question, Adam. I'm curious. Do you think there's a 0% chance that we don't have an election in 2028? And let's call election something that resembles a fair election.
I think there will be another election. There was an election.
But do you have in your probability? Do you have a probability? Do you have in your probabilistic stack a higher than average, a higher than prior elections that you've been alive for rating that the way in which the current powers that be are acting indicates that they might never think they need to give up power?
I think there'll be an election. I don't see any reason why they would.
Is there a higher probabilistic ranking?
Same number. I assume there'll always be an election. Yeah.
But you think there is as likely to be shenanigans as in the past?
I mean, we're not on a political show, but
it's just a question. You can leave it as the you think it's more likely, less likely, or the same, and I won't ask any follow up.
No, I think the same as any other election.
Okay, I think you're being dishonest.
I would like us. I would like us to be better at the whole process, and I feel like.
But this might
actually be a case for like blockchain or something to actually verify everything in public in real time.
But I'll put it this way: I think the challenge that we have is we're looking at all of this, and for a lot of folks, again, this is real, right? Whether it's my sister who's a physician scientist and thinks about grants moving forward in her career, whether again it's an immigrant who isn't a citizen yet, who is deciding, and maybe isn't even here yet, deciding where they should build their next company. Then again, we look at what's going on with USAID and the soft power of the United States, Voice of America, all of these things that we relied on, because a lot of our conversation earlier was about chart goes up, progressive liberalism, or kind of modern liberal democracy has given us a lot of the progress we have in the world today. Yeah. And so if we look at that optimism and we say, why this year are we deciding to tear down all of the tools that were used to get us to 2024 and 2025 if we think a lot of 2024, for example, is taken for granted it's better than people think? We should revise all of the tools.
It would be a shame, losing any talented, competent people who want to come here and work. So I hope
I think that's happening actively, unfortunately.
So that's actually a good segue. Let's talk about competent and talented people. I think in this job market, something equally as scary, I know for some people it's hard to think there's other things as scary as politics, but there are, and that's employment. And in a world where we're past ZERP, when AI is getting better and better, I think there's a lot of fear, frustration, uncertainty, where people are either feel trapped in an existing position that they don't like, they're between jobs and can't find work, What's your sense on, I guess, is this going to get better? Is the world going to be forever changed due to AI and teams are going to be, smaller and smaller? Is it a great time to just make a startup since there's so many no code tools? I don't know. However you want to take this, let's talk about the current state of the job market.
Yeah, I'll put it into two buckets to be helpful to, for my own clarity's sake. The first bucket is kind of market today. Separate from AI of the future. I'll put that in the second bucket. The market today is awful. And one of the reasons I'm so blunt about that is like often I hop on with folks, either clients of ours or people who are just asking for kind of a temperature check. And I have to tell them, if they're in a 6-month search, 12-month search, they're just not alone. And so people who are experiencing a really tough market have to just realize it's an ever-increasing amount of qualified talent going for an ever-shrinking amount of roles. Then this has to do with kind of available capital, the switching to doing more with less that whether it's tech but broadly knowledge work has gone towards. And so the market being bad has caused, I think, two things that are really hard to deal with as a careerist or a job seeker. The first is we're not used to job searches that are this long. I think if we were used to job searches that were this long, or we had resources, or people had savings of a certain kind, whatever else it might be, or benefits were better, then it might be okay. But the problem is we're not psychologically equipped to think that it's normal, and we're not physically equipped to like be resourced during that time. So that's one struggle that I think people really deal with is even if we were to say, okay, longer job searches are going to be kind of a standard moving forward, we need to do better at helping people be okay with that. The second bucket is, okay, what do I do? What levers of control do I have? How can I take action? And this is where, so we have, our service nowadays. We also have courses that people can take and a bunch of different content. And a lot of it aims at the same objective, which is I think people need to kind of understand what they want to do to reduce their anxiety. In other words, building a system, and it doesn't really matter what you do inside that system, but that allows you to wake up every single week and know what you want to do, as opposed to being reactive every morning when you wake up to like, do I feel like looking for jobs today? Did I respond to everything I wanted to respond to from the applications I sent last week? Should I do this homework that some company sent me, but it feels really long? A lot of the anxiety and the wasted energy of job search comes from people being reactive and deciding every time they receive or see something or gain the energy to do something to then take the action. Instead, saying, okay, I need to create an engine for myself. And in that engine, I'm going to decide to look for a certain amount of jobs every week. And I won't go over or under. I'm going to, every time I receive interview homework, I will do it no matter what, but I might time box myself to save my energy, but I'll never take myself out of the running of an opportunity just because that interview homework might seem intimidating. So I think, again, people kind of having an expectation or setting expectations for themselves will allow for more sustainable, less anxious approaches to job search. And again, then the people can focus on their weaknesses, whether that's inside interviews, they want to be better storytellers, or whether it is a top of funnel problem and they want to get more creative with their outbound. But by maybe standardizing and normalizing the week-to-week process, they then get to spend extra energy, or they'll have more extra energy to spend to optimize the parts of the process that they might either view as weak or they want to take more advantage of, maybe their network, et cetera. So again, I think the first bucket, I don't have all the answers to other than letting people know that they're not alone. I think there's some stuff we have to do as a society to make people more comfortable with longer searches. The second bucket, I think, is if you want to take action, the best way is to reduce uncertainty as to what actions you want to take, because it is the normal actions. You should be applying, doing follow-ups. You should be prepping for interviews a certain way, and it's just going to be longer. It's going to break at some point for most people in knowledge work. But you want to reduce the amount of uncertainty that you wake up with every day as to what actions you should take.
And you've built free agency to help this process and help make it go right and ultimately place people. Can you give the minute long or 2 minute long pitch on free agency for anyone who's listening and hasn't heard of it, for both the employee and also a company?
Yeah. So our whole concept comes from the notion of Hollywood-style representation for tech talent. And the idea goes back to representation as being really key here, where people are not regular executors of job searches. They aren't normal sellers of themselves. And so the fact we return to that activity every couple of years when we're in the motion of going out to market for a new thing, whether we're employed or not, it's unoptimized. We shouldn't be going it alone. And so what we do is we pair very closely with folks at the mid to C level inside tech and say, hey, we want to pair with you on the notion of your job search. That means everything from the engine that gets you interviews all the way to performing well inside of those interviews, all the way to negotiating that final offer into being something really rewarding and top of market. So that's a very concierge experience, very handheld experience. And the way that we've set it up is it's a percentage of income on the other side once you're in that new job, which means we're also really incentive aligned to get you to that goalpost. One nuance to this is that's for a very selective, very senior audience nowadays. So we work very exclusively with certain profiles for that main service. So the other thing that we've recently done is we democratized. We want to say, okay, we can't take as many clients. The market's changed. How do we allow some of best practices to be proliferated more broadly? So now we also have a course. So it's a 5-day intensive that teaches people the same tools we use for our clients, less of the hand-holding, less of the concierge experience. It's called Breakthrough Job Search. And Breakthrough Job Search, again, a 5-day intensive where we say, okay, we just want to give away the secret sauce. Some people want the secret sauce automated and they fall inside of our ideal candidate profile. For other folks who want something a little more accessible, and this is most folks at this point, now the course says, look, we'll give you all of it. It's on you to execute. But whether it's getting interviews at a higher rate, performing well inside interviews, or again closing those top market roles, it's the end-to-end playbook that has gotten people over $400 million in offers since 2019, like you mentioned. And again, it's all about instituting a system that really, really works excellent for anyone within knowledge work.
Yeah, and so I guess I think right now, senior people, really good people, are probably always going to find work. I really fear for, or just have empathy with, young people just entering the workforce today. I'm a big remote work guy, but I actually think when you're young in your career, that's the time to be with other people face to face, learn your skills, connect, socialize, right? And so do you have any words of wisdom for young folk right now who are just entering, ad tech, marketing, any sort of tech-enabled advertising field?
Let me give you 3 thoughts. I want to give kind of the thematic answer about leaders and young people and what's happening to them. I want to respond. I forgot to give you that bucket of what I think AI is doing, and then I'll give the tactical words of wisdom to the young folk who are entering, kind of generally tech and ad tech and marketing in particular. So broadly speaking, actually, leaders are really hard hit right now. Funnily enough, now you don't hear about it as often because they're often in tech. That's a stigma to be out loud about being unemployed, etc. But a lot of leaders are unemployed and they're struggling because there are less leadership roles just as a quantity. There are less of them in this market because companies don't want to commit to too much headcount. And when you commit to hiring a leader, they either have to inherit reports or build a team. And there are very, this whole concept of very highly qualified candidates being in the market, they're not used to competing with 3 other potential very highly qualified VPs for any particular role. And so what's required of them inside interview processes is really spiked compared to a few years ago. So I will say, I think they're getting hit hard too. And my quick words of wisdom for them, so that we can orient towards others, is they actually have to, for the first time, I think, really take, and if they're newer leaders, they might not have to do this, but compared to prior searches, leaders have to prove themselves more than they might have kind of expected, because usually a leader has a resume and they go, oh, I'm the fancy one that executive search comes to. I shouldn't have to, prove myself too much. That's changed a lot just because of the numerical basis. Young people are experiencing, just the quantity of them from a volume perspective, going for a shrinking, still larger amount of roles compared to leaders, but still a shrinking amount of roles, I think are experiencing a lot of frustration. And that's very real from a numerical perspective. Let me save my words of wisdom for them, but let me just acknowledge at the top front that trend is real and related to the AI trend. This is where I don't know what's going to happen. And I think this has to do a lot with where we don't know where AI workflows are truly going to begin to, quote unquote, take over jobs, or, kind of have a more impactful. So far, it's a do more with less while using ChatGPT style thing that's happening inside employers. It's not yet, oh, we have 3 marketing AIs on Adam's team. That is anywhere from 1 to 5 years away. But it still caused this shrinking and headcount planning that has caused this, kind of contraction. In general, I'm not sure, just again, because where we go with this AI transformation moment, and this is why I think, and Sam Altman has said this a lot, I think he's being honest about it. He's like, we don't know either. And we think the world should be having more of this conversation. He's constantly said in interviews that they're actually slower at releasing things because they want the world to play with, 3.5 and then 4 and then a reasoning model, because they don't quite understand the same way they didn't understand when they released ChatGPT. That was supposed to be a quiet release. If you hear the stories of OpenAI leaders and podcast interviews, they go, we didn't think it was going to blow up. We thought it was like an interesting research preview, just like the other research previews they had done to the point. And the world actually found so much use out of it, and they didn't realize how good it was in some sense already. So I think we're not having those conversations, and therefore also we can't time it. But that's our industrial revolution moment, and I can't pretend to know more than others about what that looks like. So then, how do we get? Yeah,
I was going to say it's really interesting because the smartest people that I talk to have the humbleness to say they don't know. And then a lot of people who say they know have the the prescriptive thing to tell you what to do. And it's kind of like this stuff is advancing at kind of, still like insane rates. And I think like it's obvious what you can do today with things. And of course, people are making their processes and work more efficient, but it's not obvious at all what's going to happen next.
Exactly. So the exponential differential on product is too fast, which has never really happened before. That's never we've like had growth in the internet, but like the internet wasn't changing so frequently when the internet came out. It was still the internet. It's a great point. So that's the AI portion. I mean, the best piece of advice I have for everybody, by the way, on that is to actually be trying. I'm surprised I'll like meet a CTO who like hasn't used the latest like Claude model or things like that, much less like the average knowledge worker. And I'm going, what are you people doing? Like you need to be, and they then ask me, then they challenge me back and they go, okay, how do I keep up to date like you? And I go, I don't know. I'm too addicted to Twitter. So like, that's how I am using, Visual Electric, which is a nice image generation tool before anyone else, or how I was in AI Studio with Google and Gemini using their Flash thinking before DeepSeek's reasoning model came out, and everyone was like, "Oh, DeepSeek is the first reasoning model that shows its chain of thought." No, Gemini Flash Thinking 2.0 before DeepSeek was released, just in AI Studio, was showing its chain of thought. So I don't have a good recommendation other than develop an unhealthy addiction to X, which I don't think people should do. But that's the hard part. So I say go find the fire hose and stay up to date. I don't know exactly how. Now let me bring that to young people who are entering knowledge work broadly, and then kind of to the sub industry here, ad tech, martech. There's two components of advice that I give to any young person. Let me, by the way, plus one, as you know, the in-person stuff and just kind of being that good worker. Let me just plus one what you said earlier. The other two things, first is start to get really good at understanding what's right around the bend when it comes to what we just talked about, which is using these tools as a young person, and not only using them, to get by when you're in college or in your first job or trying to do your job search. I'll give everyone a framework as to how work is going to change, even though we don't know exactly how it'll look. I refer to it as 3 muscles in this OSD framework that all jobs are kind of going to morph into. We don't know exactly what it'll look like, but it's orchestration, which is the integration of AI, agents, systems, workflows. That's like where someone's setting up a system. And so a lot of people are going to be orchestrators. Then there's supervision. These are people who are going to be editing AI in progress or AI results. They'll be polishing the output and kind of putting the human context or review on top of some sort of, again, in progress or outputted AI workflow. And then there's the delivery, which is kind of like, okay, whether it's physical, in the case of like literally physical delivery of some sort of AI or robotic output, or digital, which is being the interconnectedness between teams or people that aren't connected through automated workflows. Those are the 3 muscles that I think all jobs will move to. Who knows what the final form looks like. And so if you're a young person, you used to be valued for your ability to tactically execute on like copywriting at an ad agency. And that just isn't as valuable anymore. And there'll still be some of those jobs, but it's just not purely as valuable. And so you have to maybe use this OSD framework and understand, okay, the 3 things that are valuable now: orchestration, supervision, delivery. So let's say they pick, okay, I want to be in that supervised bucket. That might mean as a young person getting really, really excellent at pairing with different tools, different foundational AI models, at generating AI copy, being a curator, being an editor on top of it, and going, my value proposition to an ad agency or an inside of an interview for an early stage company is I'm really good at using these tools. I'm going to tell you how my day 0 to 30 looks completely different compared to the average young person who might try to take this role, where I'm going to be able to deliver a quantity of campaign or an optimization around campaign that they just cannot fathom, because I have gotten good at supervising what exists today as tooling, which also shows a resilience and a kind of change attitude that says, no matter how marketing changes tomorrow, I too, as this young person in this career, will be good at adapting and making use of those tools as they change. So that's my first, is like, as that young person, think of this OSD framework and try to apply it and be a little bit ahead of the curve compared to your peers. You'll still have to like show that in interviews, which is hard and is a storytelling technique, and get your first foot in the door. But it allows you to really begin the process of showcasing that you are this above average, above replacement person. Those individuals will still be around in knowledge work, even in a day and age where we might otherwise have a lot of people unemployed and on UBI. The second bucket for these young individuals is to realize more than let's call it, a decade ago where this advice first started to proliferate, having your own projects is useful. Now, I don't say that because people will hire you for this. I think that is maybe a little bit overrated. It's not because it builds a great resume to link to your crappy mobile application that you developed with your friends. And if you're impressive enough, maybe you can link to it and it looks good enough, but mostly because it gives you the ability to practice these skills. A lot of the things that young people are going to lack is just the internship, or to your point, like they're not getting osmosis because they're not in an office in the first job they did have for 6 months before they were let go. And so they don't have the ability to experiment, release a product, see over time how their different approaches, kind of proliferate in the world. And so for a young person, let's say in marketing, it's not that I want you to go build a marketing thing so that you necessarily show it to the next employer, although again, if you do something impressive enough, you might, but so that you can say something about having launched email campaigns with personalization, or say something about having done programmatic bidding in ad tech, so that you understand and can give those stories. Again, not because you need to point to it in a link on your resume, but so that when you're in conversation with Adam for a job that he's hiring for, you can say, oh, here's what I've done in that space, which is something you would have been able to say if you had a normal job in a normal market 10 years ago, because you would have gotten that internship or that associate role that doesn't exist today. So you do that work, not necessarily for proof of work, but to then in conversation show evidence of skill set.
I love that. And you're spot on. Basically, throughout my career, when I was just entering the marketing sector and, we were just getting brands on, Facebook and social media, it was actually really valuable for me to be very interested in all of those products and understand how they work and understand how online communities work and how to integrate them with the rest of the marketing stack. And so I think what you say, Sherveen, is spot on. As a young person, learn new tools, learn new systems, and there's just so much upside for you because you're going to be able to spend more time on it since you're not, encumbered by all the rest of the projects in life that someone else is. So you can definitely have a lot of early mover advantage. Well, Sherveen, this was awesome. I appreciate you coming on the show. Where can people connect with you that are listening to this?
I'm Sherveen on X, so you can find me SHERVEEN, and then LinkedIn. If you type in Sherveen, I'm Sherveen Mashayekhi. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, and then if you go on YouTube, we have a variety of shows. Probably the best way to kind of find it is again either type in my name. It's like Sherveen Show is the name of the channel, or you can type in the flagship show that we've got that people can check out is the Feedback Loop. It's kind of like a bizarro version of Shark Tank, so you can see some of my content there.
Awesome. And we will also put links to those things in the episode description. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and we will see you next week.